Most people don't think of Elton John songs and Shakespeare's sonnets in the same sentence, but maybe sometimes they should. Back in 1969, Elton sang in one of his hits, "I hope you don't mind that I put down into words how wonderful life is while you're in the world." And it turns out that when you account for the differences in style, differences in time, he's saying much the same thing that Shakespeare said in Sonnet 29. And it doesn't really matter whether either of them is talking about a man, a woman, mom, dad, friend. It's just about that need to have somebody, even if they're not right there at the time, but somebody that makes you feel better about life, so that when things are really bad, you can think about that one person and know that at least as long as they're in the world, something is right. We need that. Whether it's 1969, a few hundred years earlier, a few hundred years later, those needs don't change, even though the language does. We rarely ask students to interpret a song, much less to do it without listening to the music. But all too often we ask students to tell us what a poem means, and we do it without helping them to hear the music of the poem. And the music and the rhythm are just as important to any poem as they are to any song. We need to help students see and hear poetry differently. Some of that starts with understanding what one part of the poem is about in a very ordinary sense. And then with that idea, you can go back and look not only more at what the poem is saying, but how it's saying it. You'll start to find that Shakespeare's music isn't that much different from Elton John's music, once you learn to hear the rhythm and not just to hear the history of the language. I'm not in the top 10 of the world's great poetry readers. I'll never be up there with Dr. Jim Nichols, who gave every poem more meaning than I think maybe sometimes the author did. But try to hear the music. When in disgrace with fortune and men's eyes, I all alone beweep my outcast state, and trouble deaf heaven with my bootless cries, and look upon myself and curse my fate, wishing me like to one more rich in hope, featured like him with friends possessed, desiring this man's art and that man's scope, with what I most enjoy contented least, yet in these thoughts myself almost despising. Haply I think on thee, and then my state, like to the lark at break of day arising from sullen earth, sings hymns at heaven's gate, for thy sweet love remembered such wealth brings, that then I scorn to change my state with kings. How wonderful life is while you're in the world.